Dear listeners, today we celebrate our 100th episode of Worldchefs podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar, and you're listening to World on a Plate. Now, it's over 95 years ago that Worldchefs was founded. This was at the Sorbonne University in Paris with Auguste Escoffier as honorary president, a name that you probably have heard a lot. And to celebrate our 100th podcast episode, well, I have a surprise. I have with me here Auguste Escoffier, great-grandson, Michel Escoffier, who in fact has dedicated a lot of his life to keep that legend of the name of the Escoffier in our minds. But in this episode, we're going to take a step back and to get to know the man who has been named the king of chefs and the father of modern French cuisine. But so who was actually Auguste Escoffier? Now, welcome on the show, Michel. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Ragnar. Yes, good to be with you, although I'm in London and you're probably in Paris, I suppose.
Yeah. Now, I know you travel around a lot in your work with
yes,
the
we both travel certainly a lot, and thanks to the technology, which of course didn't exist in those days, we'll talk about when my great-grandfather was organizing these famous dinners, the Dîner des Piqûres.
That's right.
Which involved 30 or 40 cities across Europe at the time when they had not even they had the telegraph, I think, and yeah. Maybe the telephone, but not much else. Yeah. Anyway.
You wonder how people managed to organize anything at the time, when you couldn't check.
Amazing.
You couldn't check your hotel beforehand, or you had to send a telegraph before. But so Michel, yes. So thank you so much for taking time off to come on this podcast. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And I remember you were at our congress in Greece in 2016, and it was just an amazing eye opener to hear your stories. And I'm really glad that you are here today to share this with our readers. Because we all heard the name Auguste Escoffier over and over again, but a lot of people probably do not know exactly who the man was and what he stood for and everything he achieved in his lifetime. And so, just to set the stage for us a little bit here, you have been very involved in keeping Auguste Escoffier legacy alive, with your the museum in Nice. You'll talk about books and all the societies, all the clubs that are around the world. How did you really get involved? But what time did you really sort of say to yourself, I need to keep this alive?
Well, actually, it's a funny story. I was not involved in the field at all. I was for all my career busy with developing new projects, working out the marketing and financial possibilities of developing new things, and I got involved with a large international telecom group that sent me all over the world except for Europe. So it was far away places to actually promote the fax concept, which was just beginning in the early 1980s. So anyway, I was staying in relatively high-class hotels where you often have a word from the general manager to welcome Mr. Escoffier. If you need anything, please let us know. And you have a basket of fruit or a bottle of wine. And then I had a little note, P.S., are you related to the chef Auguste Escoffier? So I would pick the phone up, call the general manager's office and say, look, tell him that I'm the great-grandson of Escoffier, but I'm not a chef. 10 minutes later, he would call me up, or the office would call me up. Are you available for a drink at the bar? The general manager would like to meet with you. So of course, I'm always available for a glass of champagne. And he greets me with offers me a glass of champagne and says, I've summoned my chef I want to introduce you to my chef, my executive chef. And the chef arrives and he starts saying, Jack or John, can I introduce you to Michel Escoffier, the great-grandson? And he hasn't finished the sentence that the guy practically holds my hands or hugs me practically. And I say, oh my God. So anyway, it happened in places as far away as Thailand or Japan. Well, Japan, I knew that they were disciples of Escoffier. We'll talk about that later. But South Africa, Australia, Mexico. So I thought, what did Escoffier do that makes him so important for the profession in places where he's never set foot? He traveled to America. He worked the last 30 years of his career in London. So, of course, we knew he was known in Britain and United States, but not Thailand, for Christ's sake. So anyway, that's when I started getting interested in his career. And when things started to become more difficult with the company I was working for, I thought, well, this is maybe the time to change completely and start something on my own. And this is when I really started looking into Auguste's life, career, achievements. And there was already the foundation, but I wasn't involved in it. It was my father who was a member of the board, and he thought that it was time to pass the bucket and or the candle. Yeah. And this is how I started in the to get more involved in the foundation, of which I became a president in 2008.
And so since then, you've really been very engaged in promoting or keeping alive the memory. You have a museum in Nice that people can visit.
I'm sorry?
There is a museum near Nice in the south of France that people can visit.
Yes. I hope we'll talk about that too, because this is very important for us. Of course, the foundation is one thing, but the main activity of the foundation, there are many, but the main one is to run the Museum of Culinary Art in the birthplace of my great-grandfather. Right. And so I would say that, of course, most chefs knew him through the Guide Culinaire, which is still called the Bible of every chef. They all have it in the kitchen. Yeah. Also, most knew also what he had introduced in term of working conditions and organization in the kitchen, where he thought of the brigade system, which is still in use today. That's when right. He had to serve many clients quickly and warm. So those things were known, but we can talk today about things that were less known, like one thing that we are trying to really show our visitors today is how incredibly visionary he was in many ways, and also a great humanitarian. Yeah. He thought, not only thought, but acted to help the poor, the needy, and particularly the old chefs who were retiring without any money. Precisely. Hey, so tell me, so to go back to the beginning. So what was his career? When exactly did he start cooking as a career chef, and what was his path? You know, what time are we talking about here? Well, he was born in a small village in Provence, in the Côte d'Azur today, called Villeneuve-Loubet, which is about half distance between Antibes and Nice. And this is where the museum is, of course, as I said, in the birthplace of Auguste. And when he was 13, he had to learn a trade. He went to school till the age of 13, which shows the quality of the teachers at the time, because although he stopped going to school at 13, he could write perfectly French with no mistakes in grammar or anything else. So anyway, at 13 years old, he really felt, let's say, he wanted to be a sculptor, but his father said, I don't think sculpture will get you anywhere, so you better learn a real trade. And he sent him to work at his uncle's restaurant in Nice at the age of 13. Nice was actually, 1859 was still a county which was part of the Piemonte. Italy had not quite united yet. It happened a year after. So for 5 years, he worked with his uncle in Nice, and then he started on his own by being a sous chef at a hotel in Nice, Hotel Bellevue, where a gentleman was coming every year with his daughter, who was suffering from tuberculosis. They were coming in winter, staying several weeks. And this gentleman actually offered Auguste a job at his restaurant. This restaurant actually happened to be the most elegant restaurant in Paris at the time, called the Petit Moulin Rouge. And this is where Auguste started in 1865. And worked until the Franco-Prussian War, where he got involved in that war in 1870. So we can then talk about his experience during the war, because that taught him a lot as well.
Correct. So then that he was always very connected to the Ritz hotels.
Well, that was much later. So
later, right. So we're now at
okay. I mentioned the Franco-Prussian War because I would say that those two things have happened in his life that really formed him. One was the experience from the Franco-Prussian War, where he had to go to farms to find whatever was available. But he started thinking, and not just thinking, but actually pre-cooking food in order to be able to serve the cavalrymen who were coming back from the front and had half an hour to gulp something down. He wanted them to have something warm and palatable. So he also started thinking about conserving food, he started the idea of canning things, although the canning industry was not really developed yet. And that also probably gave him the idea of using the word brigade, as we mentioned before, for the organization in the kitchen. The other event that happened in his life, which was apart from marrying Delphine in 1878, was actually his meeting with Cesar Ritz, who was already a relatively famous hotelier in 1884, who was running the Grand Hotel in Monte Carlo. And Ritz had lost his chef to the competition, the next door Hotel de Paris. And someone said, if you could get Escoffier, you wouldn't miss anything in the exchange. So actually, the meeting of those two gentlemen, as Mrs. Ritz writes in her book, about her husband, was the happiest thing that could have happened in their professional and private lives, because only did they complete each other completely. They understood each other, but they became great friends. And from 1884 until 1902, when Ritz unfortunately fell ill and then had to retire in his native village in Switzerland, they actually worked together and really developed what we know today as the great palaces of the world, all the way a great hotel is run by, and the way the kitchens are organized, and the restaurant, the lighting, fixtures, everything was conceived by this fabulous pair. And as you said, we follow them, and at the museum we want to develop that even more, from their meeting in Monte Carlo, where they were only in winter, because of course in those days nobody dreamt of going to the Côte d'Azur in the summer, much too hot. So in summer they would go to Switzerland, and they had the other hotel was the National in Lucerne. And then in 1890, Ritz got convinced by Doyle Carty, who was an impresario in London and who had built the Savoy Hotel, to actually cater to clients who were coming to the theater but had no way to sleep and had to go back to their mansions in the middle of the night. So he thought it would be a good idea to have a luxury hotel right on top of the theater, and with a restaurant that could offer a dinner before the show or after the show. So in 1890, Brits accepted to take on the Savoy on one condition, that he would have Escoffier in the kitchens and the restaurant. And the anecdote is that at that time was the first time that ladies could be seen dining in a public restaurant. Before that, they were really dining in their own mansions or in private rooms, but not in an open public restaurant. And that shows also their sense of marketing, because the lighting was very important, because it would enhance the complexion, the jewelry, and the dresses of the ladies. And by enhancing the ladies, they would please the gentlemen that paid the bill. Mm-hmm. So that was the thing. And then after the Savoy, where they stayed for 7 years, they opened the Ritz in Paris in 1898. But they had to come back to London because the Prince of Wales, future Edward VII, had made sure that they would be commissioned to take on the Carlton Hotel that was still being built, and opened in 1899. And Escoffier actually stayed for 20 years and retired from the Carlton in 1920. So he had a fabulous career, international career, in the 30 last years of his life, practically in London, except for this little intermezzo in Paris.
Yeah. It's just it's an amazing and inspiring story, because, you know, we have young people starting in industry today, and we sort of tell them, you know, it's a great industry because you can go so far from humble backgrounds. And so listening to the story of Auguste Escoffier, from a 13-year-old boy in a local little restaurant in Nice to become a military catering, and from there to high-end luxury. And but you mentioned like the way he rethought and was innovative with the mobile catering unit for military. That probably didn't exist. You know, who is going to think of that? How to optimize the catering for the military on the move, and then the brigade, military term. You also mentioned, how do you organize a kitchen brigade so that everything is done synchronized, and this is like one of the impact he had. What other impact on industry? He was an innovative man, right? And he, you mentioned also the lights in the restaurant, and. What was the impact on industry to have people in Thailand 100 years later almost hugging you and crying their love for Auguste Escoffier?
I think the fact that it's maybe even more recognized in a way today, maybe thanks to films like the remarkable film made by Arte, the Arte channel on Escoffier, a 90-minute film that was shown on prime time. But also the media in general are getting more and more interested in Escoffier, because I sometimes tell students as a shortcut, I said, I believe that he lived at a time when he was able to actually make the cooking pass from the Middle Ages to the modern times. Mm-hmm. This is why all the great chefs that came in after the war in the 60s, like Bocuse, Trois Gros, Guérard, Verger, they're all gone except for Michel Guérard. And he's going to be in his 90s now, and I hope he's in good health. But all these chefs have created things of their own, recipes and everything, but they all said, you know, we couldn't have done it without the basic principles that were really laid out by Escoffier in the Guide Culinaire as the basis. So I would remind that he also, I remind the students they should read the introduction of the Guide Culinaire. There are 4 editions and 4 introductions. What he says basically, and this is where he's such a visionary, that cooking, like fashion, will evolve with time. We need to take into account the changes in people's living habits, which go accelerating. He writes this at the beginning of the 20th century. There are hardly any cars on the road. So we will have to offer shorter menus, lighter dishes, and cooking, whilst remaining an art, will become more scientific. You know,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. And then I think he has that in the next book, which he was published in 1912, which was the Livre des Menus, which was the complement to the Guide Culinaire. And so the thing that he also says, what will not change are the basic principles of cooking, the fundamentals. And if you have the fundamentals, you can create, you can invent, you can do all sorts of things. But if you, I saw one day reminded it came to me like that when I was talking to students. I said it's like music. If you have the basics, you can play Chopin, you can play Bach, you can play jazz, you can improvise. If you don't have the basics, you will end up making noise. That's all. And they understood that. So the other thing which I wanted to mention, by the way, is not just the organization, but also the behavior in the kitchen. When he started, people who were thirsty would drink alcohol. And you can imagine at the end of the day, some of the arguments were dealt with knives lying around the place and all this. That was rather embarrassing. So he banned alcohol in the kitchen. He also banned smoking in the kitchen because he didn't want any ashes to fall in the dishes while they were preparing it. And also, he didn't want any shouting in the kitchen. And there is an amusing example, which is just on words. In French, we say aboyeur. And this is the guy who announces the order, the plate that is ordered by the client. Aboyer means to bark, so the barker. But he changed that to annonceur, the announcer. You don't have to shout the thing across the kitchen. You can just, announce the dish, and that's good enough. So that shows already, and he wouldn't be caught shouting himself in the kitchen. If something was wrong and made him angry, he would walk out of the kitchen and then come back a couple of minutes later and explain calmly what wasn't right. So this is an important aspect of his personality, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned the books that are still alive today, and many chefs look at it as their own Bible, and the basic. He was a great mentor as well. I think he trained himself personally.
2,000 chefs.
2,000 chefs. He
yes, well, that's one thing he's very proud of. He says in his Memories of My Life, which was, well, he wrote in French, of course, Souvenirs Inédits, but my father published them in 1985. And then my dear wife, who was born in America, so was French-American, translated into Memories of My Life. And he says, I personally formed over 2,000 chefs, and in their turn went around the world to promote French cuisine and French product. He was very keen also on promoting French product, because he said France was lucky to have the best products of the earth and the best wines. So why not take advantage of it? So he didn't just do that, because while he was in London in 1911, he was chef at the Carlton. He was part of a few people who created the Westminster Kingsway College, which is in London at Westminster, in 1911. And this school is still prominent and one of the leading schools in Britain. And that also reminds me, incidentally, that the foundation in 2004, on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Entente Cordiale between Britain and France, we organized a twinning of the 4 lycées in the Côte d'Azur with 4 schools in London, of which one is the Westminster College. The other one in London is the University of West London. And then 2 more, Bournemouth and Poole and East Kent College. And we organize a competition which actually is made in pairs. The 2 students from the twinned schools compete together. And this year it was going to take place in London, organized by the University of West London on the 20th of March. It will be judged by great chefs from Britain and France. And I will have the jury myself, looking forward to it. And it's something that we do every year, but alternatively, once in England, once in France, and each school in turn organizes it.
Excellent. Hey, that sort of, I was thinking, I wonder what education looked like when he was young and starting. It must have been like purely vocational, that you would go into a restaurant and you would learn everything in the restaurant. It was apprenticeship and vocational. I wonder if culinary schools existed before that time so much, or when did we see like the lycée professionnel like we have in France, like the professional college to learn cooking? That is that maybe also at his period where you mentioned the
well, there's a substantial difference between the French approach, which, by the way, is changing, but it was very much teaching in school and then going to possibly practice what you learned in a restaurant in a short stage or something. The Anglo-German approach, but in England too, you have schools, and then a bit like France, but in Belgium, Holland, Germany, it is much more geared towards working already on the workplace and then going to school to check what you've acquired, to test, yourself. So France is now trying to do a bit of both, because we realize that apprenticeship in a restaurant is vital. Most of the great chefs that I met, they all said that what maybe helped them becoming what they were was the chef they worked for, and all that they've learned from. And we have also now, since 2010, the foundation signed a partnership agreement with American developers who actually have started two schools, one in Boulder, Colorado, the other one in Austin, Texas.
That's right.
With the name Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. But the amazing thing was when the person who was behind the project and financed it, in fact, Jack Lawson, had the incredible visionary idea of starting Escoffier Online. Some people were doubting whether it could work, but apparently I've already participated in a couple of sessions, and it's amazing. It works perfectly well. And today they have over 8,000 people registered on the Escoffier Online. Right. So when the thing that we didn't expect, or they didn't expect, was the fact that when it was started in 2016 or 17, and COVID came up, all the schools closed, but we were able to tell the students of the brick and mortar schools that they could continue their program by getting online. So that was quite a visionary thing as well.
We adapt. I mean, people probably said the same thing about the first cooking book. You can't learn cooking from a book. And I've seen old cooking books where recipes were written like stories. They weren't written like ingredients and processes. They were written like telling a story. And so it's always changing. And we adapt to new technologies. And probably Escoffier would have been the first one to say, well, if it helps learning faster and better, then all is approved. I mean, so he really put his signature through his books and his mentoring, and all the schools that carry his name. The Ritz has their own institute as well, don't they? And the Escoffier in Boulder and Texas, they are a World Chef recognized school. We had our friend Kurt Bachman on our podcast earlier to talk about these innovations. And but there's another aspect to your great grandfather, and this is actually where we come when we come to Worldchefs, he was very involved in what was called then, what is now called Les Cuisiniers de France, was now then called La Mutualité des Cuisiniers de France, which was like a syndicate or a retirement plan for, or what have you.
Yes.
This is where Auguste Escoffier and the 20 countries around the world formed World Association of Chef Societies. So maybe tell us a little bit more about his involvement in the association.
Well, first of all, just a couple of quick anecdotes. When he arrived in London in 1890 at the Savoy, he started a deal with the Little Sisters of the Poor, by which they would come every morning to pick things that hadn't been used the day before and were perfectly edible and everything. And he even came up with a recipe that was called Kai Pilaf. The quails, apparently at the time, they were only serving the white meat, the wings, and not the legs, So he would be putting that aside in a cool place, and did this great recipe that the poor had called the gala dinner of the Little Sisters. So that was one example. He also wrote an essay that he sent to the editor of the Figaro paper in 1910, which is an essay on the extinction of pauperism, where he gives solutions, not just we should do that or we should do that, but solutions on how to help. And you mentioned the mutual assistance fund and all this for cooks, but he goes further. It is for all workers were not getting anything, no social security of any kind. He says they should at least be entitled to what the military and the civil servants already have, which is not much, but it's better than nothing. And so he comes up with solutions. But the most extraordinary thing he says, there's a paragraph in that essay that where he says that to finance the whole thing, the countries of Europe, nations of Europe, should unite, which they will do fatally one day, 1910. But because if we don't do, we will end up having the most abominable war. And 4 years later, you know what happened. So during the war, 1914, he also organized a committee and wrote to raise money for the families of the chef, of his own chef, who had been drafted to fight in the war. And the families had nothing. So during those 4 years, he really managed to collect quite a large amount of money that he gave to something like 75 families. So these are examples of, although he was serving the rich and powerful, he was always concerned with the needy and hunger and everything else. I'm sure today he would follow the Resto du Cœur and all these organizations that help people who cannot afford to eat, and serve them proper food. So that I think is an important aspect of his personality, which we are putting forward at the museum. So maybe we'll talk about the museum a bit.
This resonates really well with Worldchefs and what we're doing today, and it really is comforting to know that I'm pretty. I hope he will be proud of what we have achieved with our Feed the Planet programs, with our training poverty alleviation, training people out of poverty into our industry, educating about sustainability, educating children about healthy, sustainable diet. Is what Worldchef is doing today, and it's actually it's actually keeping that same legacy alive and working under the same principles.
Absolutely,
as Escoffier would have done. Hey, just before we go into the museum, so I mean his cuisine is really still relevant, and just sort of I want to hear from you, because he created a lot of signature dishes, and there's a lot of his own creation in his books. Which one for you would stand out still today, which is still alive, we consume regularly?
I'm going to mention something which is pretty evident to everyone. It often comes out as a question in one of those television quiz and things. Who is the inventor or the creator of peach melba? So he actually created, I can mention 3 desserts that are still made for famous actresses and singers. Peach melba, we'll come back to that. Fraise Sarah Bernard, who was a great actress, and Poire Belle Hélène. Belle Hélène was a sort of little wing towards the opera by Offenbach, right. La Belle Hélène. So peach melba is now a worldwide dessert served everywhere. The thing that even in his lifetime got him a little angry was the fact that so many people now add whipped cream to this peach melba, and he said that this would actually spoil the subtlety of the dessert, which, as most people know, on the bed of vanilla ice cream, he puts peaches poached in vanilla syrup. White peaches, if possible, because they're even more subtle than the orange ones. And then on top of the peaches, raspberry puree. And in season, you could add a little sliced fresh almonds on it, but nothing, and certainly not whipped creams. This is for all the restaurants that actually. So one day I asked the chef, I said, why do you put whipped cream on the menu? He said, well, I understand what you're saying. He knew that there wasn't whipped cream on the original thing, but he said, if I don't put it, the client asks for it. So you say, just explain to the client that there is no whipped cream on the peach melba. So that's probably the most famous one, and served all over. For the other recipes and creations that we find in the Guide Culinaire, I suppose it's up to the chefs to decide. They can always, as he said himself, they can always adapt things. But a tourne-d'our Rossini is still a tourne-d'our Rossini, even if I don't think he created that himself, but he at least respects the recipe.
Yeah, precisely. So that's and we can learn about all this in the museum down in the south of France. You can fly into Nice, and there's a little train that takes you into the countryside. Beautiful, between Antibes and Nice. It's like paradise on earth, isn't it? And we can learn all about this history and the works.
You must come and visit us, because we're going to explain to you also. So it's as you mentioned, it's not far from the Nice airport. About 10 minutes driving. It's in the village of Villeneuve-Loubet, which is split in two, because most people know the beach part of Villeneuve-Loubet, which is called Marina Baie des Anges. So they all say Marina instead of saying Villeneuve-Loubet, but it's part of the same commune. And the village, in the middle of the village, there is this house on 5 floors with 10 rooms, of which right now 2 are dedicated to Escoffier. And we have a major project coming up. We're actually in the process of looking for the financing, donations and also support from the state. This project is to redesign the visiting path. The house being the birthplace, we don't want to knock walls down. The house will stay as it is. But we did buy an adjacent house to the museum where we could put the offices, which we now have in the museum, and gain some more room in the house itself. And we want to have use a lot more video, a lot more visual things rather than just objects. We will keep the objects. I remind you that we also have a library which is open to any researcher on appointment. And the library has over 4,000 books, and we have 3,000 menus, of which obviously we cannot physically show them all in one room. So we're going to use a lot more of the modern technology with screens, so that people can actually have the menus come up on the screen, and they can choose various sections of those menus. We have menus, festive menus, we have historical menus. So all this takes, of course, quite a big budget, which we're working on right now. And we hope to be able to do all the physical work and introduce all this, also not just video, but more interactive things, so that visitors can actually test themselves if they wanted to do a recipe, which ingredients they use, and if they use the right ones, they get a green light. If they make a mistake, they get a red light. I mean, that kind of thing, which is more than just showing objects, and which we will keep, of course, and we will have more of the Escoffier life and work across every room. His contribution to gastronomy, not just in a couple of rooms, and all through the rooms, starting with his debut in Nice and finishing with the Carlton in London. So we're going to enhance. We have two hotels that are going to help us a lot. And one is the Savoy in London. The other one is the Ritz in Paris. Both general managers are on a list of supporters of the project, as well, incidentally, as Prince Albert of Monaco, who is an honorary member and honorary disciple of Escoffier. And we could maybe finish with that and say that Escoffier is alive and well and lives all over the world through disciples. A little over 10,000 of them in 36 or 7 countries in the world, on the 5 continents. And they, of course, continue the legacy every day. So this is probably also the reward for having formed 2,000 chefs originally. Now there are 10,000 chefs that are disciples of Escoffier.
Absolutely. And we're looking forward to our pilgrimage to the museum. And we will make sure that we put on this podcast the links so people can find it easily, and instructions. You have a nice website there as well. So that'll be a real pleasure.
Well, I hope we can welcome a lot of your listeners. And as I said, the project, if it goes ahead, will be done between the end of 24 and 25. But the official opening of the new museum we're aiming for May 26, because that would be exactly 60 years after the creation of the museum in May 1966, thanks to the major contribution of one of the Escoffier's disciples then, who subsequently went to America and became a chef of private families. And then after the war, came up with the idea of creating the foundation, and gathered a few of his French colleagues, and together they created the foundation. And thanks to the family, Escoffier family, who gave the house to be turned into a museum, the museum was created at the same date. So May 26 should be a great date. And we already have from the President of the Republic, Mr. Macron, a letter saying that he would happily give his haut patronage for the opening of the new museum and the forwarding legacy of Escoffier.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Michel. Congratulations with your endeavors to keep Auguste Escoffier alive in our hearts, as he is for so many chefs. And thank you for taking time here to share a light and enlighten us about his life and who he was, because it actually puts a lot of things into perspective. We know we have a lot of volunteers within Worldchefs in our association who also are disciples of Escoffier often, and they give back to societies, and they live by the same principles. So it's a great honor to have you, Michel, always, and a great pleasure to talk to you and listen to you. We could talk for hours.
And incidentally, I still have my little, what you have on your jacket here, my little pin, which I am happy to use on official occasions, because I think wax is doing a great job. I occasionally also talk to Charles Carroll, who was president then when I visited wax in Greece. Good memories. So absolutely. Keep up the good work, and thank you for letting me participate in this podcast.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening in. You're listening to World on a Plate. We were talking about the legacy of Auguste Escoffier, 95 years after founding Worldchefs back in Paris in 1928. Lots of history there, and an amazing person that still lives with us in the kitchens and in our hearts all around the world. Again, thank you to Michel. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You're listening to World on a Plate. I'm your host, Ragnar, and this is Worldchefs.